Thank you, Carl. My name is Arisa, and I'm most definitely an alcoholic. I want to thank Carl for asking me to be here. And, it's nice to be back with you. It's been a little while since I visited your meeting, so it's great to be here. The date of my last drink was October the 13th, 1993. And for that, I am truly, truly grateful. But I promise you, I did not feel that way on October 14th of 1993. I did not come to Alcoholics Anonymous because I thought it was a good idea. It's one of the things I like to start off with. You know, for me, coming to AA was the last thing I ever wanted to do. It was the absolute last card on the bottom of the deck after I tried every other card twice, is how it felt. I didn't want to quit drinking. You know, my first drink, I was 15 years old. I grew up in Corpus Christi, Texas, which is in the very south of Texas. Banana trees in the backyard, palm trees in the front yard, and I could walk to the beach, which was about a block away. And I loved drinking. I loved drinking. My mom comes from a long line of alcoholics. She's the adult child of an alcoholic. My dad comes from the long line of missionaries, and that made for a strange growing up place. So, you know, not to mention just being Brazilian in South Texas in the 70s was very unusual, especially when you told somebody that you were Brazilian and they looked at you and went, huh? Because I'm not exactly what most people think of as the typical Brazilian, but there's my dad, who is definitely the typical Brazilian. That's all I can tell you. And so life was, was a little strange. And uh, there was a lot of violence in the house. A lot of what happened was done in the name of God. I remember being in preschool and going to my mom and saying, Daddy hit me. And she said, well, what did you do to deserve it? And I learned right then and there, you don't ask for help. You just don't ask for help. And by the time I was in fourth grade, I remember thinking that something was really, really different and wrong about my family and that someday I was going to have to fix it. No Al-Anon issues there, right? So by the time I got that first real drink, I was thirsty. I had no idea what alcohol could do for me or to me. I didn't even know that drinking was illegal because my parents would give us little bits of wine or champagne on holidays, sips of beer, whatever. I had no idea that when I shared a half a strawberry daiquiri, frozen strawberry daiquiri on the end of a pier with a friend of mine who was a senior and I was a sophomore, and she put one nip in the whole blender, so it's not a lot of alcohol in there, right? But we're sitting there like we're so important on the end of this pier, watching the sun go down over the ocean. It's so beautiful. It's like this, movie moment, right? And we have our daiquiris in the styrofoam cup, and we're good girls, so we don't throw them. We're not litter bugs. We don't throw them away. And we're walking back to her truck because we are in Texas. She had to have a truck. And there's an undercover cop, and I get a minor in possession, no alcohol, none, zero, zilch. Like, that's the way my drinking started off. Police officer searched the car. We literally didn't, she only had one nip, right? We'd already used it. We'd already drunk it, but I still ended up with a minor in possession. And here's where things went a little haywire. I looked at her and I said, if I'm going to be in this much trouble, I'm going to deserve it. So I talked her into taking me back to her grandparents' house. I found a screwdriver and I took the hinges off of the liquor cabinet, which was of course padlocked, right? And I proceeded to have a drink out of every single bottle in the cabinet, and it was an extensive liquor collection. Needless to say, things took a little turn to the worse, and I ended up getting locked in the den after having broken some things. The boy that liked me showed up and left and never spoke to me again. There were explosions of all sorts and kinds, like from inside of me, from the inside the blender without the lid on it. I mean, I just was at alcohol instant disaster. But I had to tell you something. Here's what I never understood, that it's like the lights came on that night. I always like to say it was more like somebody snuck up behind me and pulled the plastic bag off of the top of my head. I didn't know I was suffocating. I didn't know that there was more oxygen in the world. See, I had so many problems. I mean, I was a depressive kind of kid. I was geeky. I was tortured by, I was picked on by everybody. I thought I was the ugliest thing in the world. And as soon as I had that drink, I had this calm. And I knew that everything was going to be okay. You see, I mean, those 9-step promises, they came true for me that night, sitting on that pier, watching the sun go down. I didn't know how anything was going to actually get fixed, but I knew it was going to be okay. I felt like, my experience can benefit others, right? All of those things that we talk about in the 9-step promises, I found them in that ooey gooey, sticky strawberry daiquiri with half a nip in it. And I found even more of it every time I took a swig out of those bottles. And I had no idea that everybody else didn't have that happen for them. I couldn't understand why anybody wouldn't want to be drinking all of the time, because, I mean, this is wonderful. This solves my problem, right? I'd always felt like my skin was just on too tight, or else I was just one big nerve ending. And boy, I was down for drinking as much as I could, as often as I could. So within 3 months, I'm on 6th Street in Austin, going into the bars at the age of 15, right? And I am not, it's against the law for me even to be on the premises, right? But, it's okay. I'm an exception. I'm the 5'11" redhead, so nobody thinks I'm 15, Um, and I just assumed that rules are from other people, because aren't they? Right? I mean, I'm the exception to every rule, right? I heard somebody say recently that beautiful women and drunks think they can go anywhere they want. And I was both, right? So I went anywhere I want. I was supposed to be untouched by anything. It's not how it went. I got abducted and raped that night, and I was lucky to get away. I was beaten up. It was ugly, and I escaped onto a dark highway, and I finally found a 24-hour like pancake house, and they helped me find my cousin who lived in Austin, who came and got me. And of course, being the adult child of a missionary, son of, like super Christian, whatever, like, you need to be a virgin when you're married, or you may as well go to hell. So I'm ready to go to hell right now. I mean, it's all over. I'm taking the hot shower and I just want to die. And from that moment on, I started drinking for oblivion, which is what Bill calls the sickest of all reasons. And I prayed every night that I just wouldn't wake up. I couldn't take any more inside of me. I just couldn't do it. I turned 16 not long after that. And I was given my grandmother's 1976 Cadillac, which is one of the longest cars ever made, right? Cadillac DeVille. And I used to drive it down Ocean Drive. And there's this cliff, T-junction. And I would sit at that red light. And I would plan to drive off the edge because I just couldn't take the pain anymore. I mean, I just didn't want to live. And I'd be sitting there staring at the red light, trying to collect all of my strength so I could just gun the motor. And then a miracle happened. A miracle happened. And it happened. This happened several times. The light would turn green, and I would remember that there was a keg party out at the beach. And my car would turn right instead of going straight. And I'd drive out to the keg party or the bonfire or wherever I was going, but somewhere there was alcohol. Somewhere there was alcohol. And just for that night, I didn't have to drive off the edge. And it took me years to realize that alcohol was saving my life. And this is why I think when I got to AA, even before I got to AA, when people would talk to me, don't you think you have a little problem with alcohol? I'm thinking, no, I've got a problem with you. Get me out of here. I need new friends, like, no, 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 no. You don't get it. You do not get it. So today I'm married to a non-alcoholic. He's a sweetheart, bless his soul. But he's strange. You ever notice this? Like, non-alcoholics are just a little strange. David has a drink or two, and he starts getting this slightly tipsy, out of control feeling, which he doesn't like. So he stops. See, the difference for me is that when I start drinking, I don't get out of control. I get in control. Baby, I can handle anything. I can handle everything. What do you have? Throw it at me. I got it. I got it. My life, I got the courage to face things that nobody should have to face. I got the courage to stand up to my father and say, you're not hitting me anymore. That's the kind of things that alcohol did for me. So when you start talking to me about maybe you shouldn't drink so much, I'm thinking maybe you should shut up. Right? I'm thinking, no, you don't know what you're talking about. You've never, that war cry that we have, like, if what had happened to me had happened to you, you would drink too. And I became, you know, this person who got more and more defended and more defensive. And I really thought that I drank because of my dad, and because of getting abducted and raped, and because of getting beaten, and because of this and because of that. And so when I graduated from high school, that was my first, my first trip to AA was the week after I graduated. Now, mind you, when I graduated from high school, I was voted most likely to succeed, class favorite, class president, and I was going to Rice University, which is a really geeky school if you don't know that. Like, all the NASA people are there, right? So, and then there's me, I'm proving to the world that I'm okay by going and doing all of these things. And yet I'm being dropped off at AA, right? And what I learned in AA was that clearly I hadn't drunk enough. I wasn't old enough. That's basically what I was told. I was 18 years old, and I asked those nice old ladies who, there were about 7 people in the meeting, and they said that, they'd be my home group, and they didn't give me a meeting list, which I honestly think is the most important piece of literature in Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't know that there were other meetings. This is long before the internet, right? They gave me a nickel for the payphone if I wanted to call somebody, right? It's a very different world, very, very different world. And I remember asking them, how do you go to college and not drink? How do you do that? And they said, well, you could tell them you have an allergy, but they didn't tell me I had an allergy. I didn't because who reads the doctor's opinion? That's not page 1. I tried to read the big book, but I'm reading about some old stockbroker dude, I'm like, I'm sorry. I need to have some fun, right? I don't know how to do this. So anyway, I go to college, and I last about 3.5 years, but okay, I should skip back. So just in case you don't get it, like, I'm a girl who drank for proof, my favorite drinks are, what do you have? Like, what do you have? Mad Dog 2020 was one of the most regular drinks I had, like, I'm a teenager, right? We drink whatever you've got. And my idea of one is until it's gone. Who saves the cap of anything? I have drunk the whole 5th of Jack Daniels in half an hour. So I got alcohol poisoning on a regular basis. So I've got the creepy crawlies, invisible things on me 3 days after I finished drinking, right? Now, mind you, I've never been to a detox, never gotten medical attention. My mother was the type who would step over me with disgust and say, maybe if you suffer enough, you won't do it again. She didn't understand alcoholism, even though her dad got sober and died with almost 40 years of sobriety. But he got sober after she left home. So she really didn't understand anything about what alcoholism is, right? But she did know enough to drop me off at AA. Like, we don't know what to do with you. You take her, right? So I spent those 3.5 years in college trying to control and enjoy, which I was never able to do. And but what I did get from the big book was they talked about it being some sort of a spiritual malady, and I got that. So I went to search for God. Isn't that what anybody would do? It's like, okay, fine, So I start taking religion classes. I start going to therapy. I start taking antidepressants. I start doing a lot of yoga. I can put my legs behind my head. I'm chanting with the Hare Krishnas. And I'm going down to Brazil. I'm paddling up the Amazon in a teeny tiny canoe about this high above the water, swimming with the piranhas. Like, if God is anywhere, he's in the Amazon, right? So I'm going to find him. And well, I guess in some ways I did. While I was in the Amazon, I broke my wrist. And that's what took me back to Corpus Christi. I got sober in Corpus Christi. I'd been in Houston, like I said. And my idea of successful drinking is no creepy crawlies 3 days after, right? That's my idea of social drinking. I don't know. Nobody's told me. I don't know that everybody else isn't having blackouts all the time. So when I tripped and fell, I ended up back in Corpus Christi because I'm a right-handed artist with a standard transmission car, and I am in a cast from fingertip to shoulder. right? And my red hair then was twice as long as it is now. So try washing that with they didn't have waterproof casts. It was a disaster. So I am looking like the typical newcomer walking in the door of AA when I got back, right? When I got back to AA, the thing is that I went out to meet a friend one night, planning to have 2 drinks. The truth is, I was lucky not to get arrested that night. I don't remember the night. My parents tell me I was home before midnight, and at noon the next day, I'm still drunk, right? And that's when I got lovingly put into the hands of another sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous who started talking to me about what alcoholism really is. And I was finally able to identify with you guys that it didn't matter that they were still all old enough to be my parents. You know, there wasn't a young people's meeting in Corpus Christi at that time. And I like to say I walked into what I very lovingly call a fundamental meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, there was this one lady, Marianne White, who spoke a lot with Clancy all over the place. She'd been a loner in Africa. She had the perfect, you know, Dallas, the TV show, like Texas hair, like, you know, a lot of hairspray, long nails, the perfect like Chanel suit and everything. And she'd sit there and click her fingers, and she terrified me. But she made sure that I got a job in that group washing ashtrays. I didn't smoke. There were no non-smoking meetings. There wasn't even a non-smoking section in the meetings back then, right? And I'm washing ash. I'm like, what does this have to do with getting sober? And they appointed me my first sponsor, and she had 2 months of sobriety. And she was a bad chronic relapser. And she scared me a lot too, you know. She was a school teacher who was smoking crack all the time and drinking. And I'm like, oh, right. But she told me, she said, you know, I think if you don't work the steps, you're going to drink again. And the truth is, by that time, I never wanted to drink again. I was so done. I was so desperate. I was so hopeless. I'd done everything else I knew to do. The only reason I was ever willing to listen to you people was because I was out of good ideas. Coming to Alcoholics Anonymous in my book was a bad idea. But if any one of my good ideas had worked, even a little bit, you never would have seen me darken your door. So anyway, like I said, they took me right through the steps, and they weren't perfect. That woman was probably only a page ahead of me in the big book, but here's the miracle. 26 years later, I'm still sober, and so is she. They knew her only chance for really getting to stay sober, she was a chronic relapser, was to find another alcoholic who wanted what she had with desperation. And I did. So she was my first sponsor. And, you know, she didn't teach me a lot about the big book, but she did teach me a lot about willingness. She said things to me that I still hold true all these years later. Things like, when your sponsor tells you to jump, you don't ask why. You say, exactly how high would you like me to do that? Right. So she taught me a lot about willingness, and she was the one who made sure that I had jobs in Alcoholics Anonymous that I did not like, because if I got the jobs like the chip girl and things like that, like I would have felt special. And she's like, you are not special. So I was not special. And the truth is that my story after getting sober is way more interesting and often more painful than what happened to me before. When I was about 3 years sober, I started to have a relationship with God, meaning that I'd been trying, but all my friends, they just had the nicest God, and God did this for them, and God did that for them, and I just hated them. You know, because when people like my sister would say, oh, honey, I'm praying for you, I felt like, you know, somebody just slimed me. Like, could you just keep your God on your side of the road, right? Just, nah. I can get on with a higher power, but this idea of like, other people's idea of God really, really bothered me, because I couldn't understand why the bad things happened in the world. I couldn't understand why a little girl would get beaten up the way that I did. I couldn't understand how, you know, the children were starving in Africa, because it was those years, you know, we feed the world and all that, and AIDS was really big, and I couldn't understand all of those things, and how could there be a God? And, you know, I was definitely the doubter. So much the doubter, and still so much the victim too, to be honest. And it took me a while to really feel like my first God was good orderly direction in a group of drunks, right? I believed in Alcoholics Anonymous, but I had all these friends who felt like they had this great connection with God. And the first time I ever felt like I might have some connection with God was when he walked in. I'm sure none of you have ever experienced feeling like God must love me because look what he's giving to, you know. My God was still one of Santa Claus, in other words. And So there's this great guy, he lived in New York, and I just gotten accepted to graduate school. And so I'm like I said, I'm an artist. It's my dream. I'm going to New York to go to graduate school, and he's already there, and this is wonderful. And my sister that I was really close to, he was one of her best friends, and so she had set us up. And look, clearly I'm doing something right because it's all just fallen into line, right? And I'm starting to believe that maybe God cares. Until he called me one day and he said, I can't do this anymore. And he said that, he couldn't stand the idea that I might drink again. He comes from a long line of alcoholics. His mother died drunk, and he couldn't stand the idea that I might drink again. And I got to tell you, I came this close to leaving AA. Really did. Really, really did. And moving to New York with all of that, I'm planning to get there, and I'm going to go stay with my sister while I look for an apartment. And she calls me and she says, I have to tell you something. And I said, what? And she says, well, and I said, who is she? And she said, me. And a year later, they were married. They were married. And so instead of moving to New York, where I was going to have my sister, who was one of my best friends, and this wonderful guy, I moved to New York knowing nobody, and they wanted nothing to do with me. And my sponsor, who had 25 years at the time, started going through a divorce just before I left. And when I got to New York, she never returned another phone call. Not one. Never heard from her again. And I got to New York, and all I had was a meeting list of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the first place I moved into was down in Hell's Kitchen, and it was scary to go out at night back then in Hell's Kitchen. They picked up a serial killer right outside my door about a week after I moved in. So I figured it might be time to move. So I moved into an SRO up on West 85th Street. What that is a single room occupancy. It's an 8.5 by 11 room. That included the closet. The bathroom was down the hall, but it was what I could afford. And it was where I would it was at least in a safe neighborhood. And, there I was. And that first night I'm there, and I pull out that meeting list book, which, in New York is about this thick. And I find that there's a meeting on my street that night. So I go out to the street to look for the address, and it's my building. It's my building. And I walked back in and I talked to the receptionist, and I was like, is there a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous in here? And she's like, yeah, it's in the basement. Of course, it's in the basement. I should have guessed, right? So I go down to the basement, and that room was full of the men who work in the building. The elevator operator, the cooks, the janitors, everybody. Every single guy in that building lived in a sober house up in Harlem, and this was their getting sober job. And there was nobody in that meeting besides me. I was the only woman in the meeting. It wasn't a men's meeting. It was just, I was the only woman in the meeting. And I was the one there with most sobriety by a lot. And I've been calling my sponsor, and I feel, I've been going to meetings, and I haven't found the meetings that are like, kind of AA I want, that I need, that I feel like I need to be okay. And yet I have this room full of men who are like, well, we don't know about the steps. They don't have a big book. They don't have any of that stuff. And so the next thing I know, I'm sponsoring a few of them. I'm taking them through the steps because I don't know a man to send them to, right? And I just start helping because that's what I was taught, to clean house and help others. And, that AA isn't a self-help program. It's we help others so we get out of God's way so he can fix us program. So I start doing that. And eventually I do find my people in New York, and then, I'm starting to get everything rolling again, right? And life is coming together. And like I said, I'm in graduate school, and I paint with fire, by the way. I'm a professional pyromaniac. I paint with smoke. And so I'm what you do when you're in graduate school for art is you make a big exhibition. Okay. So for 2 years, all of your activity is towards this big exhibition that you're going to be putting on. So I have been working on it, and I am now, the exhibition's supposed to be in September, and the July before I'd met my husband not long before, and I came up this direction out to the Cape with my husband for the 4th of July. And on the 4th of July, some kid shot a bottle rocket through the window, and the whole place burned up. 2 years worth of work gone up in flames. Little irony, considering I paint with fire. Yes, I do understand that. I was working in fire prior to, and the police, actually the fire marshal did want to question me, but fortunately he was out of the state at the time. But the long and the short of it is, when I walked into that room, so right, you got to remember, I'm a girl I'm a certified victim by the state of Texas, okay? What had happened to me had always been my get out of jail free card. I can match people one for one. If you want to talk about tragedies, let's go. Let's go. Okay. I hold my own pretty well, pretty high stakes over here. So when we were allowed to go back into that room to see if there was anything salvageable at all, I got to tell you that it was like walking into a Salvador Dali painting. The light fixtures were dripping down. The clock was literally, like stretched. And you could see how the fire had run through that room and up the walls and over the ceiling, right? And I got to tell you, it was like God whispering in my ear, okay, kiddo, that was your idea of smoke painting. Here's mine. And my work got so much better. And I went into that room with another sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and she looked at me and she said, this didn't happen to you, right? That was the first time in my life I thought, yeah, I know. Fires just happen. When you guys were reading how it works earlier, and thank you, you did a nice job with that, it says, one of the most misquoted things in Alcoholics Anonymous, people say, I'm going to tell you what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. But the truth is, it says what we were like, what happened, and what we are like now, because it is life, and it keeps coming at you. It just keeps coming at you, or at least it keeps coming at me. I don't know. What Alcoholics Anonymous has taught me is spiritual alchemy. How do you take a negative and turn it into a positive? In fact, that's why I paint with fire, because there's all these negative connotations, and you can't control it. But in the immortal words of my little kid when he was 3 years old, he came home from preschool and he says, Mom, you get what you get and you don't get upset. I'm like, will you sponsor me, right? Because that's what it is. That's the whole deal, right? How can I take whatever life is giving me and roll up my sleeves and be willing to just squeeze those lemons and trust and rely that God's got enough sugar to make it beautiful? How can I do that? Can I do that? No. Am I willing to do that? See, lack of power is my dilemma. That's what I've seen over and over again. I'm the girl who wants to wrest satisfaction. I'm going to make it happen, right? And yet, time over time, life has thrown me curveball after curveball. And I get to decide if I'm going to give up, if I'm going to sit on the sidelines of my life, or if I'm going to absolutely have a hissy fit. I'm good at hissy fits. I don't know about the rest of y'all, but I can give a temper tantrum like nobody's business. And when I first got sober, they told me, my first sponsor, she said, honey, I don't care if you don't like it. I give you full permission, in fact, not to like it. You just go on there and you do it anyway. And that worked for me for a while. And then later, another sponsor really started pointing out to me that although that was good in the beginning, the truth is that in the family afterwards, it says we absolutely insist on enjoying our lives. That I have to get to a place where I'm absolutely sure that God wants me happy, joyous, and free. That's God's ideal for me. And that my job is to dig my heels in, and I'm not supposed to let anybody rain on my parade anymore. This is going to be fun. This is going to be good. I don't know how. I really don't know how sometimes. I mean, I got to tell you, sometimes it is beyond me. I do not know how. So all of that work is gone, right? All of it is gone. And instead of feeling traumatized like so many of the other people, I was lit up. No pun intended, actually. But the work that came out of there was so much better. It grew so much overnight, right? My ideas were revolutionized. It was a spiritual awakening on a whole nother level. And I'm the only one of those 15 people who were in that studio that graduated on time, because I felt the power of God in that. And it gave me the ability to free fall into God. Like my image of what does it look like? I was talking about this with somebody the other day. What would it really look like for me to really do my best to do God's will always? What does that look like? And this girl, she's saying, well, I think it would look like a lot less friction. I'd probably be really, and I was, what I told her? I don't know how y'all feel about cussing, so I won't say it exactly. But I basically said BS, okay? And she's like, what? Here's what it looks like when I really try my best to do God's will always. It looks like I fall down a lot, right on my butt. I fall down over and over and over again. I like to remind people that, David Ortiz, for those of you who know anything about baseball, I'm not a baseball fan, but I am living in Boston, so you can't not know who David Ortiz is. But if you don't, Babe Ruth, most of us know who he is. Babe Ruth and David Ortiz are two of the best hitters ever. They're the home run kings of the home run kings, right? They are. Okay. You know what else they're really well known for? They're the strikeout kings too. The only way they became the home run kings is because they swing for the fences every single time with their whole heart and their whole soul. And more than half the time, they hit air, not a ball. That's the truth. So if I'm going to really try my best to do God's will always, it means I'm going to screw up. Because being absolutely perfect was what I was so focused on, right? Making a mistake. Oh my God, don't want to make a mistake. Why do you think Bill says over and over again, we resolutely look for our own mistakes? Like, what is a mistake? A mistake is something that I do believing it is the right thing to do at the time. That's what it is. I believed I was doing the right thing at the time, and yet it turned out to be the wrong thing. And can I be willing to see my mistakes today, right? Because I'm gonna make them. To be really, truly human means to make mistakes, because it's impossible to be perfect. They say that a spiritual person makes about 600 mistakes in a day. Like, that's a Pope and the Dalai Lama. And I don't think I can have 3, right? So, I mean, I tell my sponsors, I'm like, how about you do your nightly review like the Where's Waldo, huh? Like, find the mistakes, Why don't you just look for them instead of like defending myself against being imperfect? Right? It feels so much better to be able to just be human next to you. That's what it means to me to be able to walk shoulder to shoulder. That's what it means. I get to be authentic. I don't have to hold myself up to this thing. You know, when it says at the end of that nightly review that we ask God for his forgiveness, that really screwed me up. Coming from the background that I can, like, okay, wait a minute. Do I really need God's forgiveness? Well, God made me human. Then I can't be perfect, and yet I'm supposed to ask for God's forgiveness. This really screwed me up for a little while. I got to tell you, it really did. I'm like, I don't get it, because like it's like you're setting me up, right? Well, what about this? Here's what I finally came to. What if the whole point is that what I need is I need to see me through God's eyes? I'm not asking. It doesn't say to ask God. I don't need to beg God to forgive me. I need God's forgiveness inside of me, for me. I need to see me as God would see me. And when I start seeing you the way God sees you, and I see me the way God sees me, you don't bother me so much anymore. I can on a good spiritual hair day, David can do something and it doesn't bother me. And on a bad spiritual hair day, same guy does the same bad thing, right? He's getting his head handed to him. He gets his head. That's the truth, right? Because it's about what's going on inside of me. Am I willing to see how sometimes I step on the toes of my fellows, right? Am I willing to, one of my big character defects is I don't speak up very well. I do not speak up very well. I will let somebody step on my toes. I will let somebody steamroll me. I've got a lot of Al-Anon stuff on top of the alcoholism. And I can flip-flop from steamroller to doormat faster than, so fast, right? But what the goal is to stick to get more and more of that pie chart every day as a spiritual woman, more and more to get unaffected by what you're doing, right? That how I pray really finally is defining how I live, right? And that true prayer, I think, is always about getting the who right. Who's doing the praying? Is it me, or the God in me? Is it my selfishness, like still wanting the God of the Santa Claus? Or is that spiritual part of me doing the praying, right? And then I can get like in 6 and 7, like I can't work on my character defects. They have to be removed. If I start working on my character defects, all I may do is make them worse. That's all I do. My job is to pray like the whole world depends on it, and to work like the whole world depends on God, right? It's not my job to fix anything. It's my job to believe in the power of God today, right? And I do a lot in Alcoholics Anonymous. I love Alcoholics Anonymous because the truth is this: I never wanted to be sober. How did a girl who never wanted to be sober stay sober for 26 years, right? And I got to tell you, it's because I've had fun. We absolutely insist on enjoying our lives. I had to get this God that I believed is crazy about me, that I really, like, how different My life became, when I really decided to do my best to watch my thoughts and choose to believe in a God that wanted me happy, joyous, and free. Wanted me happy. That's God's ideal for me. It had always been my ideal for me. Let's make no mistake. Happy, joyous, and free is all I ever wanted, right? But what about God? Like, it's not what I believed about God. I believed in a punishing God. I believed in a God of retribution. I believed in, if I only worked harder, I would be better. But that's not what Alcoholics Anonymous has taught me. It's taught me about grace. It's taught me that, the further down the scale I have gone, the more my problems can benefit others, right? So about a year after that show, David and I were still in New York, and we were in the middle of September 11th. Lost friends. David's building was next door. My art studio was in cordoned off area, right? And we went through all of that. And we've talked a lot about this pandemic and how similar it's been in so many ways, right? Except that we've got this great, like, this Zoom stuff. Like, we couldn't even use our cell phones for a while, right? And to watch how the human race showed up for each other. How much we started to care about each other. It was a beautiful thing. It's what I saw in AA all over the place, right? But I got to see it live there. And then, we came to Boston. By the way, Boston's the only place I ever said in my entire life, not there, not there. So now I've been here 19 plus years, right? So the joke is that when I was looking at colleges, somebody showed me the movie Love Story, which, if you don't know it, it's got mountains of snow in it. And I told you I grew up on the beach, right? I didn't even own a coat. So when I saw this movie, I'm like, oh my God, I can't live there because I'll die. It's too cold. So I went to the library and I looked up where the snow falls. And I came back to my mother and I said, okay, I've decided where I'm going to go to college. It's either Stanford or Rice. And she said, you're not allowed to go to California because it's going to fall in the ocean or you're going to have blue hair. And I said, but Mom, you had blue hair. And she said that was different. So I wasn't allowed to go to California, and I was afraid to go anywhere it snowed. So that's why I was in Texas. But so when David got this job in Boston, I had to be willing. I was like, okay, God, I guess okay, here we go, right? Here we go. And it's been great. It's been great. I found that being uniquely useful is not necessarily nauseating. Whoever thought about being useful? So when I was, before I moved to New York, I was talking to my sponsor, and we were talking about the third step, and she was talking about turning your entire will and your entire life over to the care of God. And and I said, but Pam, I don't know what God's will is for me. And she said, oh honey, you know what God's will isn't. So why don't you start with that? And I said, okay. I get that. I can, that's a good place to start. Fine. And then she said other things like, I asked her, I said, but what if God wants me to be a missionary in Africa? And she said, honey, if God wants you to be a missionary in Africa, then you're going to enjoy it. And all I can tell you is that this is not Africa. It's Boston. It was the place I really didn't want to go. But in many ways, like my aunt and uncle, who are still very, very involved in the church, and they were here visiting, and she looked at me, and they know nothing about Alcoholics Anonymous. She pats me on the back and she's like, I'm so glad somebody else went into the family business. I'm like, oh, okay. But she's right, because that's what we do. That's what we do. We talk about God here. We talk about God. We don't pretend that this isn't a spiritual solution. It is. I have had a revolutionary spiritual experience. My whole outlook on the world has changed. I didn't want to ever get married and I certainly never wanted to have children because I thought the world was a horrible place. And I couldn't imagine bringing another kid into a world like the one I was brought into. I didn't know it was possible to be married to somebody and not be screaming all the time. I didn't believe that anybody was ever going to love me. That's the honest truth. The reason is I'd never felt loved by anybody. If I had the opportunity to make the whole world stop and give me 2 minutes of love just all directed on me, I doubt I would have felt it. What you guys taught me is this. It doesn't matter if they like you or not. Your job is to love them. If you get busy loving them, things will change. And that's what you guys have taught me. Like I said, this is Alcoholics Anonymous is not a self-help program. It's a program where we help others so we get out of God's way. And the more I have loved you, the more I have felt God's love reflected back to me. You guys melted the polar ice cap around my heart. And I remember realizing that maybe I actually could get married. Maybe I actually could have kids because I actually knew what it was to love. I stood up for my sister and her boyfriend, now husband, in their wedding because I was able to do inventory, because I made amends to them. Because the truth is that I did have something to clean up. I had made mistakes. And the biggest mistake was that for 3 years, she'd been trying to set me up with him. And I kept saying no. I even went so far as saying, I think he likes you. But I didn't want to admit that because then I let her off the hook. For me, when I first got here, saying I'm sorry that's all I knew amends to be. And saying I'm sorry is, please let me off the hook, right? And amends was all about me finally being on the hook, me going back and picking up the pieces of my soul that I'd left all over the place so that I get to be the woman that God really made me to be. And when, I can't tell you how much that has held me in good stead, the amends that I have made. Both of my kids were born with a lot of health problems, a lot. And I could barely get out to meetings at all. I didn't, when we moved here, I had children not long after we moved here, and AA didn't show up for me there. It didn't, because I didn't know very many people. But what I did was I had a couple of sponsees, and they started coming to the house, and they brought their friends, and I started doing a big book workshop, and that big book workshop's been going on now for 19 years. 19 years of me just, again, though you be but one man alone with this book, that it doesn't say I'm going to find my people. It says the fellowship's going to grow up around me. And my daughter, at the end of this school year, she had to write an essay. And you know what that essay was? How the alcoholics had raised her. How she'd been raised by alcoholics. And she wasn't talking about me. She's talking about all the women that I sponsor. She's met a lot of my friends all across. We were talking about Liz Bailey, and she loves Liz Bailey. She knows Liz Bailey. We're talking about Clancy, and Clancy's played the piano for her. Like, my kids have been loved by you because my family doesn't show up for them. You guys are my family. I buried my mom in August, and a week later, my father-in-law. And it was a rough go at the end. I'm the one that put my mom in hospice back on it was either Mother's Day or Easter weekend. I forget now. But anyway, I put her in hospice. And I honestly think the cancer got in her brain. For 25 years, I've been making amends to her. And I've been taking my family there for a minimum of 2 weeks a year, right? And I've built a really good relationship with my mom. And the next thing I know, the whole thing is going to hell in a handbasket fast. And at the end of my mother's life, my sister has moved her. They've changed her will. They've done all kinds of crazy things. They told me that I had to show up and get my stuff that she said I could have out of the house. And then they called the cops on me. I mean, crazy stuff. Like, you'd think I was drinking. It was crazy, right? And not once did I have to yell or scream or try to protect myself. See, I don't believe in boundaries anymore. I know what they mean when people say that. But for me, when I start trying to protect myself, I start getting mean. I start getting ugly. I start compromising my principles. The truth is this: God protects me. And nobody can make me lose my integrity. Nobody can make me do things that I'm going to be later ashamed of. And even, when my mom died, when she was getting close to death, she was very close actually to my father-in-law, and she knew that Charlie was also close to death. And so I told my family I couldn't come down to see her. And I really honestly was relieved because I didn't think it was going to be a helpful thing to anybody. And my mom died, and my sisters planned the funeral for almost immediately, knowing that I couldn't come. And my father-in-law died on Thursday, and I flew to my mother's funeral on Friday. And when I got there, I found out that they'd texted me to tell me that she had died. And they texted me a day after she died. And they didn't have a seat for me at the funeral. Not at all. And not once did I have to say anything horrible. And you know what happened that morning? I went to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous in Martinsburg, West Virginia. And I went into that meeting, and it was super full. And at the end of that meeting, they had a time for burning desires. And I raised my hand for the first time ever in 26 years. I raised my hand and for burning desire, and I told them that I was on my way to my mom's funeral, and I told them a couple of small details. And this woman with 35 years of sobriety and another one with 20 plus years of sobriety, they came all the way up into the mountains of West Virginia with me to bury my mother, to sit next to me because my family wasn't going to be there. That's what Alcoholics Anonymous does for me. And that woman, the one with 35 years of sobriety, I got to be there for her. She was supposed to speak for me, and then her mom died. Her mom died, and I got to be there for her. Like, that's the way. Like, is that odd or is that God? My God is bigger than anything, anything. I have seen miracles that just, they shouldn't happen. My kids aren't supposed to be okay, and they are. They are. Because, I didn't feel like God gave me sick kids. I felt like God gave them the mother who was going to stop the world and do everything that you guys told me how to do and showed me how to do, and love them incredibly, so that a miracle could happen for them. And they really, the fact that they're okay, kids like mine generally die. And I got 2 of those kids, and they're doing great today. You'd never know. You'd never know. And I'm married 20 years now to my husband. And you know what? I never, ever would have gone out with him if I hadn't had my heart stomped on by my sister and her husband. It wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have happened. I am a girl who learns by picking mortar out of her teeth. I don't know what that's about, but I'm trying real hard to become a little more teachable. I'm trying real hard to, remember that, all of this is available to me. You go to the ocean with a thimble, you get a thimble full of water. How much of God do I want? That's what I try to remember, Like I said, true prayer is about getting the who right. Who's doing the praying? Is it selfish, or am I really praying for God's will, for knowledge of God's will for me and the power to carry that out? That 10th step is the most important thing I do every day. Am I holding God's hand all through the day? Simplest 10th step you'll ever do. Am I holding God's hand? Because when I'm holding God's hand, nothing touches me. And I can stay that woman of integrity. And for that, I am truly, truly grateful. I love being sober today. I absolutely love it because it's a barrel of monkeys. It's a lot of fun. I absolutely insist on enjoying my life. And it's been so nice to be with you guys. Carl, again, thank you for having me. And thank you all of you for my sobriety. Good night.